The harbour of Port Marigold reeked of salt, rotting fish, and desperation. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered coat hanging loose on his shoulders, the fabric stained with sea spray and years of hardship. His ship, the Seafire, sat anchored in the bay, a once proud vessel now patched and scarred, her sails threadbare, her crew dwindling with each passing month. He had come to the auction out of necessity, not choice. He needed able bodies, men who could haul rope and climb rigging without question. What he found instead was a spectacle that turned his stomach. The slave trader's platform stood elevated above the crowd, a wooden stage slick with morning dew. Men and women were paraded across it like livestock, their eyes hollow, their spirits broken. Elias watched with clenched fists, hating the necessity that had brought him here, hating the world that allowed such cruelty to flourish beneath the Caribbean sun. Then she was brought forward. The crowd erupted in jeers and laughter. The girl stumbled onto the platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that had rubbed her skin raw. Her dark hair hung wild and tangled around her face, and her dress, once perhaps white, was torn and filthy. But it was her eyes that caught Elias's attention. They burned with fury, not fear. She lifted her chin and glared at the crowd with such defiance that several men stepped back. "This one," the trader bellowed, his voice thick with mockery. "Too wild for any man. She's bitten 3 buyers, attacked 2 guards, and destroyed property worth more than she'll ever be. Starting bid, 10 silver pieces, and that's charity, gentlemen." The crowd roared with laughter. Someone shouted, "I wouldn't take her for free." Another voice called out, "Throw her to the sharks and save us all the trouble." The girl's jaw tightened, but she didn't lower her gaze. She scanned the crowd like a caged panther, searching for the weakest point in the bars. Elias felt something stir in his chest, a recognition he couldn't name. He saw not a wild animal, but a survivor, someone who refused to break despite everything the world had thrown at her. In that moment, she reminded him of himself 20 years ago, when he'd first been pressed into service aboard a merchant vessel, his spirit still unbroken, his dreams still intact. "Sold for 10 silver pieces," the trader announced when no one else bid, "to the fool who thinks he can tame her." Elias hadn't realized he'd raised his hand until the words were spoken. The girl's eyes found his across the crowd, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the harbor fell away. She studied him with the intensity of someone trying to determine whether he was predator or prey. Elias held her gaze, his expression steady, offering neither threat nor false comfort. When the trader's men brought her forward to complete the transaction, she moved with surprising grace despite her bonds. Up close, Elias could see the bruises blooming along her arms, the cut above her eyebrow, the fierce intelligence in her green eyes. "She's your problem now, Captain," the trader said with a gap-toothed grin. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Elias counted out the silver coins, nearly the last of his funds, and took the rope that bound her wrists. The girl tensed immediately, her muscles coiling like a spring ready to release. "Walk with me," Elias said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." "That's what they all say," she hissed, her voice rough from disuse and defiance. He didn't argue. Instead, he led her through the crowded harbor toward the docks, keeping his grip on the rope loose, almost negligent. She could have bolted if she wanted to, he wouldn't have stopped her, but curiosity seemed to win out over flight instinct. The Seafire waited at the end of the pier, her hull scarred but seaworthy, her masts reaching toward the pale morning sky. The few crewmen still aboard watched their captains approach with wary eyes. "Captain's gone mad," one muttered. "Bought himself a wildcat instead of a sailor." Elias ignored them. He guided the girl up the gangplank and onto the deck, then stopped near the mainmast. With deliberate movements he drew his knife. She flinched, but he simply cut through the ropes binding her wrists, letting them fall away. She stared at her freed hands as if they belonged to someone else, then looked up at him with confusion warring against suspicion. "What's your name?" Elias asked. She said nothing. "You can tell me or you can keep it to yourself. Makes no difference to me." He sheathed his knife. "I need crew and you need a ship. We leave with the evening tide." "I'm not crew," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "I'm property. That's what you bought." "I bought your freedom," Elias corrected. "What you do with it is your choice." For the first time since he'd seen her, uncertainty flickered across her face. She looked around the ship, at the worn deck planks, the patched sails, the exhausted crew. This was no grand vessel. This was a desperate captain's last chance. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why waste your coin on me?" Elias considered his answer carefully. "Because I've been where you are, and because I saw something in your eyes that most people lose long before they reach that auction block." "What?" "Fight." Chapter 2. Storm and Confession. The first 3 days aboard the Seafire were a test of wills. The girl, who finally revealed her name was Isla, refused to speak to anyone but Elias, and even those exchanges were curt and defensive. She watched the crew with the wariness of someone who'd learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The crew, for their part, kept their distance. Most were decent men worn down by poverty and circumstance, but they'd seen enough cruelty to be cautious around someone so obviously damaged. Elias gave her a hammock in the crew quarters and access to the ship's meager stores. He didn't assign her duties or make demands. Instead, he let her observe, let her find her footing on the gently rolling deck, let her remember what it felt like to make her own choices. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in from the east. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind began to howl through the rigging like a chorus of angry spirits. Elias ordered all hands on deck, his voice cutting through the rising gale. The crew scrambled to secure loose cargo and reef the sails before the full force of the storm hit. Isla emerged from below, her hair whipping around her face. She stood near the mainmast, gripping the wood as the ship began to pitch and roll. "Get below!" Elias shouted over the wind. "This isn't safe for—" "I know ships!" she yelled back. "Let me help!" There was no time to argue. A rogue wave crashed over the bow, sending water cascading across the deck. One of the crewmen lost his footing, sliding toward the rail. Isla moved without thinking, grabbing a rope and throwing it to him. He caught it just before he would have gone overboard. Elias saw the way she moved, instinctive, confident, born of experience rather than fear. "Help secure the mainsail," he commanded. She was beside him in seconds, her hands working the ropes with practiced efficiency. Together they fought the wind, pulling the heavy canvas tight, tying knots that would hold against the storm's fury. The rain lashed down like needles, and the sea rose up in mountains of dark water. But Isla never faltered. When the worst had passed and the storm began to subside into ordinary rough weather, Elias found her sitting near the stern, soaked to the bone, her chest heaving with exhaustion. He sat down beside her, equally drenched, and for a long moment neither spoke. "You were born to this," he said finally. Isla looked out at the churning sea. "My father was a merchant captain. I grew up on his ship. I knew the rigging before I could read. I knew navigation before I could write my own name." Her voice grew distant. "Then he died. His creditors took everything. The ship, our home, our future. My mother tried to keep us afloat, but we were destitute. When she died 2 years later, I had nothing. No family, no inheritance, no protection. How did you end up at that auction?" Her jaw tightened. "A merchant offered me passage to my uncle's estate in Jamaica. He lied. Halfway through the voyage, he tried to—" She didn't finish. "I fought back, broke his nose, so he sold me to cover the damages. I've been passed from one master to another for the past year, each one trying to break me, each one failing." Elias felt rage kindle in his chest, not at her, but at the world that had crushed someone so gifted, so fierce. "You're not property anymore," he said firmly. "You're crew, if you want to be." She turned to look at him, searching his face for deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she said, "I want to sail. I want to feel free again." "Then sail with us." He extended his hand. After a long moment, Isla took it. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused from rope work. In that handshake was an understanding, a compact forged not in words but in shared recognition of what it meant to survive. Chapter 3. The Pirate's Gambit. 3 weeks later, the Seafire limped into the hidden cove of Tortuga, her stores nearly depleted, her crew exhausted. Elias had hoped to take on legitimate cargo, but legitimate merchants didn't hire ships as battered as his. The only work available was the kind that existed in grey areas, smuggling, privateering, dancing along the edge of piracy without quite crossing the line. Isla had proven herself invaluable. She could read charts, navigate by the stars, and handle the ship with a natural grace that made even the most skeptical crew members grudgingly respect her. But more than that, she'd begun to smile, rare flashes of genuine joy when the wind was right and the sea was calm. Elias found himself watching her more often than he should, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the way she laughed when teaching a young sailor how to tie a proper bowline, the way her eyes lit up when she spotted dolphins racing alongside the ship. He told himself it was merely the satisfaction of seeing someone reclaim their life. He was lying. In Tortuga's tavern, Elias met with a contact who offered a dangerous proposition: escort a shipment of spices and rum past the Royal Navy blockade in exchange for enough gold to outfit the Seafire properly and pay the crew for 6 months. The risk was substantial. If caught, they'd hang. When Elias returned to the ship and explained the situation to his crew, opinions split. Some were eager for the payday, others feared the noose. Isla spoke up from where she sat, coiling rope. The Navy patrols the southern route at dawn, but there's a passage through the coral reefs on the eastern side, too shallow for their frigates, but we could make it if we timed the tide right. Every head turned toward her. "How do you know that?" one sailor asked. "My father traded these waters for 15 years. He taught me every hidden passage, every safe harbor." Her eyes met Elias's. "I can navigate us through, but only if we leave tonight." The decision crystallized in that moment. Elias looked at his crew, desperate men on a desperate ship, led by a desperate captain, and one young woman who'd found her way back to herself through salt water and honest work. "We sail in 2 hours," he announced. The passage through the reefs was harrowing. The moon hung full and bright overhead, illuminating the coral formations that lurked just beneath the surface like teeth. Isla stood at the helm beside Elias, calling out adjustments with steady precision. 2 points starboard, steady. Now hard to port. The ship responded, threading through channels so narrow that crew members could have reached out and touched the coral walls. One mistake would rip out their hull. One miscalculation would leave them stranded and helpless. But Isla never wavered. Her father's knowledge lived in her, passed down through years of watching and learning. She guided them through impossible spaces, her voice calm even when the keel scraped coral with a sound like grinding teeth. When they finally broke free into open water on the far side of the reef system, the crew erupted in cheers. Isla's legs gave out, and Elias caught her, his arms wrapping around her as relief and delayed fear crashed through her body. "You did it," he whispered against her hair. "You saved us all." She looked up at him, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition deeper than gratitude, more profound than respect. It was the acknowledgement of 2 souls who'd found something worth holding on to in a world determined to tear everything away. "I couldn't lose this," she said softly. "I couldn't lose this ship, this crew." She paused. "You." Elias cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You won't. I promise you that." Chapter 4. Born to Sail. 6 months after that night, the Seafire had been transformed. The gold from their successful run had funded repairs, new sails, proper provisions and fair wages. More importantly, it had funded hope. Isla had become Elias's first mate in everything but formal title. The crew looked to her for guidance with the same trust they showed their captain. She'd proven herself not just competent but exceptional, her instincts sharp, her knowledge vast, her courage unshakable. The relationship between her and Elias had deepened into something neither had anticipated. They were partners in the truest sense, complementing each other's strengths, compensating for each other's weaknesses. On deck they moved in synchronization, anticipating each other's commands. In quiet moments, they talked about their pasts, their dreams, the future they might build together. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Isla found Elias at the ship's bow. He was watching the horizon with an expression she'd come to recognize, the look of a man weighing difficult choices. "What troubles you?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. "The Seafire is whole again. The crew is paid and loyal. We could take legitimate merchant contracts now, sail honest routes. But part of me wonders if that's enough, if there's something more we could be." Isla considered his words carefully. "What did you see when you looked at me on that auction block?" The question caught him off guard. "I saw someone fighting to survive, someone who refused to surrender." "And what do you see now?" Elias turned to look at her fully. The setting sun caught in her hair, turning it to bronze and copper. Her eyes held steady confidence, her posture that of someone who knew her worth, her place, her purpose. "I see my equal," he said. "I see someone born to sail beside me." Isla smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Then maybe we don't need to choose between honest merchant work and something more. Maybe we chart our own course, help those who need it, protect the vulnerable, make these waters a little less cruel for people like we used to be." It was a bold vision. Privateers with principles, sailors with purpose. The risks would be substantial, but the rewards would be measured not just in gold but in lives changed, in hope restored. "That's a dangerous dream," Elias said softly. "All the best ones are." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "But I've learned something these past months. The most dangerous thing isn't taking risks. It's living small, letting fear make you less than you could be." Elias pulled her close, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, keeping time with the waves. Around them, the Seafire creaked and groaned, a living thing of wood and canvas and possibility. "They said you were too wild for any man," Elias murmured. Isla laughed. "They were right. I'm not meant to be tamed or owned or diminished. I'm meant to be free, to sail, to fight, to love on my own terms." She looked up at him. "With someone who understands that freedom isn't about being alone, it's about choosing who you stand beside." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, a promise sealed not with words, but with shared breath and intertwined souls. When they finally pulled apart, the stars had begun to emerge overhead, ancient lights to guide ancient travelers. The crew had gathered on deck without either of them noticing, and now they watched their captain and their navigator, with expressions ranging from knowing smiles to outright grins. "What are you lot staring at?" Elias called out, though his tone held no real reproach. "Just wondering where we're headed next, Captain," one sailor replied, his voice thick with amusement. Elias looked at Isla, a question in his eyes. She grinned and turned to address the crew. "Wherever the wind takes us," she declared, "wherever people need help, wherever freedom needs defending," she paused, "and wherever there's a good fight worth having." The crew erupted in cheers, their voices carrying across the water. The Seafire rode the gentle swells, her bow pointed toward open ocean, toward possibility, toward the future. Elias wrapped his arm around Isla's waist, and she leaned into him, both of them watching the path the moonlight made across the dark water, a silver road leading to everywhere and nowhere, limited only by courage and imagination. She'd been labeled too wild, too broken, too damaged to be of use to anyone. They'd been wrong. She wasn't wild. She was free. She wasn't broken. She was resilient. She wasn't damaged. She was forged in fire and emerged stronger, and she'd found her place not despite her struggles, but because of them. Every hardship had taught her. Every betrayal had strengthened her. Every moment of despair had made her appreciate this moment of triumph all the more. The struggling captain had bought a girl labeled impossible to control. What he'd actually found was his destiny, a partner born to sail beside him through whatever storms the future might bring. And together, they would make these waters remember their names.